by the company we keep, by the ones who circle around to tend these pipes. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds to change the life from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these pipes. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle around to tend these pipes. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love.
Welcome, everybody, to part one of this two-part orientation about power and power's climate justice and jobs work. This session is being recorded, and if you would use the chat box to introduce yourselves with names, pronouns, and just sort of what your relationship to this work is. Are you on the team? Are you a fellow? I think we have a couple more people coming in. And if you're watching the recording after the fact, welcome, welcome, welcome you too. So please use the chat box if you are here in person. I am Julie Greenberg. I'm the Director of Power's Climate Justice and Jobs statewide work. When you start doing this work, you're going to need to have an elevator speech that explains in a couple sentences, very briefly, like you're in an elevator, what is power and what is power's climate justice work about. And I hope by the end of these orientations, more people will be able to narrate this work, hold the work, and kind of speak to what this work is. We've been building out the team by helping people find that, the big message, and also your own story within it. And so this is the purpose of this orientation, part one. You're going to need a piece of paper and something to write with. So if you want to take a minute to get that. Okay. I have just put into the chat box this sentence. And if you could write this on your piece of paper, that would be helpful. Power is a faith-filled organizing force for racial and economic justice on a livable planet. I'll read it again. There's actually one word I left out. Power is a faith-filled organizing force in Pennsylvania for racial and economic justice on a livable planet. Power is a faith-filled organizing force in Pennsylvania for racial and economic justice on a livable planet. You're welcome to come up with any big sentence for your elevator speech. This is the sentence I use when I sort of in one sentence have to say, what is this work that we're doing? Who are we? And I'm just going to deconstruct this sentence so we can deconstruct it together, each of the different words. So what does it mean that we're faith-filled or we're faith-based? Let's just talk about it for a minute. What does it mean to be faith-filled or faith-based in a multi-faith movement? What does it mean? And maybe we should even add the word multi into that. This is all kind of a work in process. Feel free to unmute yourself. What does it mean that we're faith-filled, we're faith-based, we're multi-faith?
Hey, Julie, it's Liz. I think it means that we are driven by the founding words of our faith and the continuing voice of our Creator to care for creation through our work.
Okay, so that would be your way of messaging that. Beautiful. Who else?
I think it means to be rooted in shared values that come from our faiths that are at the core of what drives us to do this work.
Nice, and that's the way you would speak about it. Who else?
I would say, this is Nora, I would say that it is an umbrella of faith that encompasses many types of denominations that might not typically look like faith-based organizations in a traditional, typical sense.
Yes, and power includes ethical humanists and secular folks and ethical communities that are not, a religion. So that's an important piece of what it means. And we use the language faith. There's ways of wording it that have to do with religion and God, and there's ways of wording it that don't. So that's an important thing to also wrap in, that we really are multi in so many different dimensions. Not everybody is a religious person in power and is still drawing on values and on kind of spiritual sustenance to do the work. And the range also is from very fundamentalist religious traditions all the way to kind of the most radical denominations and sort of edges of denominations. So we're really very multi. Anybody else want to speak to faith-filled?
I think
Go for it, Rory.
In this particular sentence also sort of is the place of like, I care about humans, I care about the planet, I care about lots of beings. And that might be like because of my Jewish values or because of X, Y, and Z. But it feels like the human connection.
Yeah. Anybody else? Okay, so I mean, I like to talk about the dignity of each person and each place, that there are no throwaway people or places. All the groups that are considered marginalized, like the elderly, the children, the unwell, the immigrants, the incarcerated, the Black and brown people, the people living in poverty, the people who are homeless, people who struggle with disabilities. I mean, there are no throwaway groups. We all belong, and we all belong on the earth that sustains us and that we need to sustain. So something about that that he doesn't even mention God at all. Or you could also say the same thing as, we are all created in God's image. We are all God's children. So you get to use your faith language in messaging this out. And just to also understand that power encompasses a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds. And together we're finding this kind of spiritual source. So that's just to deconstruct this sentence. Power is a faith-filled organizing force in Pennsylvania for racial and economic justice on a livable planet. We move to the next word, organizing, a really key word here, because we're not just kind of an advocacy group or like we're writing position papers or white papers of analysis. You know, we're not, that's not what we are. We're an actual organizing force. So we're building people power, and we have a very specific organizing model that is based on relationships. So one of the key tools in Power's portfolio is the one-on-one. Many of you I've had one-on-ones with, which is a one-on-one conversation. And there are different kinds of one-on-ones. There's the getting to know you one-on-one, which is just really finding out about the interests and background and skills of someone who's interested in our work, kind of just connecting with them on a human level. There's a strategic one-on-one that has to do with kind of helping people take the next step into involvement or leadership. So the person doing the one-on-one, we have a lot of training in how to do it, is thinking ahead of time, what's the purpose of this meeting? It's not just a random meeting, it's an organizing meeting of connection between two people. And typically in organizing, we all become organizers. It's like we are all it. There's no one doing the job of organizing other than us. So it's a ripple effect. Like everybody who comes into our teams, the idea is you ripple out and organize whatever groups you're in. It might be your family, your neighborhood, your congregation, your union, your CDC. What's that stand for? Community Development Corporation. I think it's always important to say what acronyms are so that everybody can be included. So, you know, we become the rippling, multiplying effect as organizers, starting with one-on-ones or small group meetings, what we call house meetings, which is just to invite a group of people into your living room or do it in someone else's living room. Right now, in pandemic, it's all in cyberspace. But anyway, you could do this on a one-on-one model, or you could do it on a small group model. But that's the basis, the relational basis of all of Power's work, and we build from there. So this word organizing is huge in this sentence. The idea of an organizer is that you do, you know, really profound listening, and that you also have ideas and seeds for possibilities to plant, both and. If you just listen, you kind of leave people in their own helplessness, despair, grief, wherever they are with the issues that we all face. It's important to listen and to know who's feeling what pain. But if that's all we do, we aren't organizing. Organizers also bring an invitation to build collective power and make a change. And so usually the first invitation is just to have somebody step in and connect them. Linda, whose face I see here in this circle, had really just stepped in boldly and bravely to invite people in her congregation in to this, you know, to connect with the climate work. So usually the first invitation is just to connect. You know, and then eventually there is a ladder of engagement where we help people kind of step in to holding more of the work. So for instance, Colson in this circle, who's been coming to some team meetings and showing up at climate justice stuff around the city, Colson, I've been seeing you over these last few years, has just taken on the leadership of a working group for Power's climate justice and jobs team. That's a next step in. And this ladder of engagement is what organizers are thinking about. So you're kind of paying attention to the people you are organizing. Okay, I invited somebody in, they came to a team meeting. Now, can there be some more one-on-ones with other people on the team so people can bond horizontally? What's this person interested? Can they join a working group, learning more about the issue, or go to a research meeting that we're organizing, or a legislative visit, or just participate in something that's sort of a deeper engagement? And eventually, we really hope that people will hold different pieces of the work, usually in partnership, you know, creative partnerships. You never have to do anything all alone. And there's a ton of support and grace, and we're really a learning community. But that is the organizing model, is like help expanding the work to build power. Systematic power building. And then when we say for racial justice, why is that important? Why are we talking about, why is that in this sentence that our climate team is using? What up with racial justice, folks? Why is that a key to this work?
Well, I would say, and I think I'm going to say the same thing about economic whenever we get to that, that it's that at least in the context that we're working for climate justice now, in the same way that we all live in the climate, it literally starts like at the edge of your skin on upward, and it's part of the context in which we're working. That's also true of racial interaction and definitely true of all things related to the economy. So it's not like even if you wanted to just compartmentalize it and escape it, you've got to wrap your mind around it in some sense. So that's at least just a first shot at an answer.
Right. Thank you. Who else?
And we see that, many, possibly a majority of the people that are affected by climate or affected by it first are people of color.
Yes. Anybody else there?
I would say, building off of what May started, that that Black and Brown communities are disproportionately affected by climate issues. Same with, and so similar communities around economic justice, and that the people that have been, like you were saying earlier, that also are wow, I just really lost my train of thought. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to say a lot more about the racism piece of this later in this session and also in our second orientation. So I'm going to leave that there for now, but also now let's look at economic justice. Why are we talking about that here in this introductory sentence about our work?
I think with both racial and economic justice, it's about balancing the scales of society and recognizing that it's tilted against, and recognizing that we need to have both a racial lens and a power analysis lens to really assess what's happening and in our communities.
Yes. Right now in this country, especially since the 2016 election, there's been a big debate between a race analysis and a class analysis of what's going on. We believe we need to talk about both, and we need to be able to talk about both race and class to the same people. So we need to be able to go out to sort of the white working class, rural Pennsylvania, where I happen to be right this minute. You can hear the orchestra of birds behind me today, sitting outside on the porch. And we need to be able to have conversations about racism, but we also need to be able to talk with brown and Black people of all classes about the pain of the white working class, the rural working class, all of the working class, which a lot of brown, Black, and low-income people are in. So we need to be able to talk about race and class in some kind of a unified way. And we can't let those issues be pitted against each other, because actually it's all an integrated problem, and the solution has got to be an integrated solution also. We know about race, for instance, that if we don't talk about race to everyone, who is talking about race is white supremacists. So if we can't bring racism and race into the conversation, even with white people all over the place of all classes, someone else is drawing those people into a very destructive force that, in opposition to the work we're doing. So we have to have those conversations. We have to learn how to do that. Some people call it the race-class narrative. And we have to be able to talk about both race and class in the same conversation. And then, of course, we're talking about a livable planet. And we're called the climate justice and jobs team, but we're really talking about all of the interconnected environmental issues. It's not just about climate. It's about the degradation of all the systems that sustain life on Earth. And so earlier when I said there's no throwaway people, there's no throwaway places, you know, we need the oceans, we need the ice caps, we need the forests, we need the waterways, you know, we need it all as humans on this planet. There's no sacrifice zone, no sacrifice people who can just be discarded as marginal. So I think we've worked our way through that sentence. And I want to say a little bit more about power and then talk about the climate piece within power. Power is coming up on its 10th official birthday. That will be in 2021. Power was founded at a convention of 3,000 local people in 2011, but there were a few years of organizing work before that to get ready for that convention, because you don't just suddenly bring together 3,000 people. So Power started with seeds from one of our national parent organizations, Faith in Action. Faith in Action paid for some organizing time here in Philadelphia, and 1,000 one-on-ones were held to find out what the people of Philadelphia at that time care about. We've since then spread out into southeastern Pennsylvania. So it started with the Philadelphia, you know, many different neighborhoods, many different people, one-on-ones, what are the issues? And you can kind of imagine what kind of issues came up. People need jobs, people need homes, people need education. There were 5 issues. And Power decided to start working where there was a big opportunity at the moment, which was in the area of economic dignity. And that was our first strategy team, the economic dignity team. There was scheduled to be a multi-billion-dollar expansion of our airport, which is owned by the city. And so we saw in that an opportunity to make demands about having unions for people at the airport, having living wages for people who work at the airport, for contracted and subcontracted folks. And that was our first campaign, the Economic Dignity Campaign for underpaid workers at the airport. It was, you know, there were highs and lows and moments of despair and moments of exhilaration, and that campaign built and built and built and won extraordinary results, including throughout the entire city. We expanded it to have a referendum in a city election about living wage for contracted and subcontracted workers. We won. All of Philadelphia is on a pathway now to 15 an hour with a union, and this put tens of thousands of dollars, probably millions of dollars, into the pockets of working people. Huge. And that campaign continues now to fight for affordable health care for those workers. So that's the Economic Dignity Campaign. Early on, another momentum moment arose in our city, which was that a fancy consulting group in Boston told our school superintendent to close 40 school buildings. And the neighborhoods just erupted. This is the anchor of democracy in our community. It's our only common space. You know, we need this, we can't close these buildings. And so Power sort of realized this is a moment when it's ripe for organizing, because there's real agitation on the ground about something people care about. And out of that was birthed Power's Education Equity Strategy Team. That was our second strategy team. Another issue that was hugely important to people was gun violence and the gateways to mass incarceration, such as stop and frisk and cash bail. Our Live Free team rose up to address all those issues. And the Live Free team is now very engaged with defunding the police and refunding the people. So for all these years, we were really working on these racial and economic justice issues. And I will just tell you now my story, because I co-birthed the climate justice and jobs team, and this is how it happened. I was involved with Power from before the beginning. I'm a congregational rabbi, and I had raised a house full of 5 kids. And at an earlier moment, a different faith-based organizing group had invited me to step in, and it wasn't the right time in my life, and I said no. I didn't have deep relationships yet with my congregation, where I've now been for 21 years. And I had a house full of little kids. I was, single parenting 5 little children. So it just wasn't the moment. I needed to be home every night for family dinner, bedtime, and I said no. But then I was with my congregation for a very long time and had deep pastoral relationships and lots of kind of capital and credibility, and kind of was a good time for me to do something that would challenge them more in the realm of social justice. And my kids, one by one, were peeling off to their own wonderful, independent, adult-ish lives. So I had a much more empty nest. And it was a great time. I was sort of asking myself, like, what is this new era for me? What am I going to do? And right then, Power was born. Another rabbi had a one-on-one with me. I didn't even know this rabbi. He invited me for coffee, and he did a one-on-one with me. And he, told me about Power. And I was like, wow, this sounds amazing. The time is right. And then one of Power's organizers invested 4 separate hours of one-on-ones in me. And I think I maybe had a meeting with the executive director too at that time. And out of those very small investments of sitting over coffee or lunch with another human being, Power got 20 hours a week of volunteer work from me for 5 years. That's what the power of one-on-ones is that people want to engage and commit and step in. And we just need the invitation, the opportunity, the support, a plan. So I was so happy to be building Power from the ground up then. And then I eventually moved on to staff part-time, and now I'm with the staff full-time directing the climate justice and jobs work. But that was the pathway of engagement. And what I was doing early on was I was the first co-chair of our education team. And then eventually, as new leadership came in there, I moved to the economic dignity team. And I was in the trenches with my peers in Power, working on racial and economic justice. We were in the streets after the Michael Brown verdict when he was murdered in Minneapolis. We were doing civil disobedience for the living wage issue. I mean, we were just side by side, shoulder to shoulder, all day, every day, doing this work. But meanwhile, in my Jewish life, my faith tradition, people were beginning to discover climate crisis. At first, I was like, my issues, I'm not an environmentalist. That's great. Somebody else can do that. It's not my issue. I'm a feminist organizer. I'm a racial justice organizer. Those have for decades been my things. But I began to, in my faith world, hear more and more about this and realize, if I don't have like a pretty intense support group to face the truth about climate as it is being revealed, I am not going to be able to open my eyes to this. So I turned to my people in the economic dignity team of Power, who are my daily friends, and said, how about if we learn about this together and see how it impacts the people we're already working with and for? People who in communities of high poverty, underinvestment in education, over-policing, high mass incarceration rates. What's going on in the world of climate for these communities? Of environmental impact and targeting and whatever. And these people were like African-American church ladies. And I've always thought, if you can organize the bingo game, you can organize the revolution. But they said we don't think this is our issue, but we love you and we'll take a look at it. And for a year, we met once a week and once a month in my living room, and we learned together. And it was quite the journey. And I, meanwhile, had in my faith world a different affinity group that's met together for 10 years. That's a study action group called Be the Change. So I had these 2 different support circles. And I do think you need some intense form of personal and spiritual nourishment to be able to face what's true in the world of climate crisis. So we spent that year doing that. And along the way, one of the things I was doing for Power was raising money for Power, mostly as reparations work. I'm not a fundraiser. It wasn't an interest of mine, but I felt like I probably can offer this skill and, sort of help bolster this work by raising some money. So we had raised some money, and we had raised some money that gave us enough money to send some people to a climate justice faith-based training weekend at Pendle Hill, which is a nearby retreat center. And so this little group that had been meeting in my living room went to that training. And it was kind of a transformational training. And what you see here is the nexus of everything we need to build a movement. We do need the funding. We do need the training. We do need the support between ourselves. You know, we need all those pieces to move forward. So at that training, these folks, these 3 African-American church ladies, go to this training run by amazing white Quakers. And it was sort of shocking on all sides. So like, for instance, one of the exercises was a beautiful exercise about imagine yourself as a tree. Imagine yourself in the past as the tree. Imagine yourself in the present as a tree. Imagine the future. Just, you know, kind of to connect the head and the heart and to nature, the whole thing. Kind of, you know, a good thing. The first thing that comes up for our group is a lynching. A Black body is hanging from the tree. And kind of immediately that group understood people have different experiences in the world. And, you know, things are going to mean different things in communities of different experience. We need everybody's experience at the table, or we're not going to get this right. The next thing at the training, these are our lovely Quaker allies. They're just deep, true, very close partners in this work. The next part of the training was about nonviolent civil disobedience and how you do it. Our people say, I have spent my entire life trying not to get arrested. What are you talking about? And civil disobedience meant something very different to people coming from poverty background Black communities. And that needed to be, and what the group needed to be wrapped into the analysis and the plan. So what that group came up with was actually white privileged people can lay our bodies down on the line more easily than many other people who are more likely to be targeted and treated punitively and not to be able to afford that. And so it's our job to do that when we can, to take that role. Like, different people will have different roles in this movement. And it was really a learning experience. So out of that was birthed, you know, eventually we continued to meet, but we eventually, over the next couple years, outgrew the economic dignity team, which we had been doing this under the auspices of Power's economic dignity team. We outgrew that team because more and more interest was accruing to this piece of the work. And we just needed to be birthed out of the economic dignity team. So we took the idea of a freestanding climate justice and jobs team, strategy team, to the whole of Power, which happens at leadership assemblies where the whole gathers. And we were endorsed as a team unto ourselves. And that was a few years ago. I think maybe possibly 2017. So we were the youngest team. And we've been just surging forward ever since then. So I want to stop there and just see if people have any questions about that history of Power or the history of the climate justice team's birth within Power before I go on here. Any questions? Okay. Well, as we started looking, still sitting in my living room back then, at the collision of climate crisis and extreme inequality, we began to realize the same communities we had already been working with were the most impacted by climate crisis. People who already were insecure in areas of housing, food, employment, health, transportation. When you suddenly get extreme weather events, extreme heat, extreme cold, the destabilizing of the planet through climate crisis, these are the exact same people who are going to be made more and more insecure. And we layered maps of the zip codes of each neighborhood in the city of Philadelphia on top of each other and kind of color coded the multiple cumulative impacts of what happens when you add climate distress to communities that are already very heavily burdened. And we created something called change the climate, working at the intersection of race, class, and race, economics, and climate crisis, something like that. Anyway, that is a resource that's available to anybody. It's a half-hour PowerPoint that's you can take out to show people, use as a discussion launcher. We always add slides at the end of it of whatever event's about to come up to invite people into. So I can tell you how to find it. It's on the Power website under the Climate Justice and Jobs Campaign tab under resources. So I would not say it's the most accessible resource, but it is there. Anybody can use it. Feel free to add your own slide about the next upcoming thing. The one that's in there will clearly be out of date from some other time and place. And our organizers are happy to talk with you about how to make use of that resource. But we created that as a way of telling a faith story about why climate matters to people. And like so many people opening our eyes to climate crisis, we started with little personal things like not using plastic bags or not driving your car so much, or, you know, opening our eyes to some of those things. And then the more we learned, we realized there is no individual solution. These things actually don't matter so much. What matters is really kind of systemic, big change. The spewers of the most toxic emissions need to be roped in, and we need to stop using all fossil fuel and fossil fuel expansion. And we need a transition plan. We need to transition into a green economy. So we learned a lot. We're always continuing to learn. But let me ask you guys this. Pretend you're a Martian and you suddenly land on Earth. How would you know that there is climate crisis? And how would you know that there is extreme inequality? Like, this is something you can actually do when you work with the group. Let's make this an experiential, observed phenomenon. This is not just kind of academic analysis. How would you know as a Martian that we're in a state of climate crisis, just looking at the globe? And how would you know that we live in a situation of extreme inequality? Let's just brainstorm some things, throw them out popcorn style. What would you notice as a Martian?
Well, you drop down into any city and you see, you know, the wealth of big development right next to houselessness. And, you know, the envelope of regularity is no longer an envelope of regularity. The climate, the quote unquote weather or whatever changes minute by minute. Can't plan.
Absolutely. You'd notice apartheid housing. You'd notice extreme difference in the resources people have. What else would you notice?
You'd notice like just actual emissions coming out of factories and fossil fuel sites, and then people living close by. You'd actually see that.
Right, and you'd see that more of those places are in Black and brown and low income communities. Like in Philadelphia, we don't see those kind of toxic emissions in Chestnut Hill, for instance. Right, we see them in North Philadelphia. We see them in Nicetown, so, and in other low income places. So we would notice that, yes. What else would we notice?
You would notice the increasing intensity of storms and wildfires and floods, but not only those, you would notice who was most impacted by them, who had the capacity to withstand them or recover from them. You would notice, you would notice the link. I mean, you know, like if you were an alien, I assume you would be able to notice the link between the change in climate and the impact on agriculture and water scarcity, which increases food prices, and then who it is that, like which socioeconomic class can withstand the increase in food prices and who can't, right? So like who suffers from increasing food prices
Yes.
would be among the things you might notice.
And if you were able to look globally, you actually would see mass migration of people who are hungry based on drought and, like you're saying, the food prices. So you would see actual mass disruptions of whole populations migrating from one place to another because of climate crisis. What else? Lori.
If you were a Martian that dropped into Philadelphia this week, an interesting place to see it might be looking at benches. I'm thinking about benches in like shady, scenic spots and whose bodies might be sitting on those benches. And then to be walking down concrete ground and sides and what the bodies, who the people are that are sitting, waiting for a bus, dripping sweat in the heat, carrying a lot of it. I mean, I think there's like a really intense, why are somebody's doing this and somebody's doing this difference.
Beautiful. Who has access to cooling, to shade, to green space? And who is in a heat island or freezing in the winter? Right. Huge disparities. Let me ask you this. Now I think we're in the 5th month of a raging pandemic, and we're seeing huge racial and class disparities in how people are affected by this virus. I mean, the virus itself is an equal opportunity, pathogen, but who actually gets the illness and which communities are most impacted by it and who dies is completely unequal. So what would we notice about that and about who has access to healthcare, and what would we see? I think we'd see what we're seeing, right? We'd see what we're seeing. So partly thinking about these things, it can look like all these things are sort of siloed, separate issues. Here we are in a pandemic, and kids in low income, mostly Black and brown communities don't have the technology to learn. They don't own their own devices. They might not have internet access. So how too bad. It's a pandemic and some kids can't learn in the pandemic. And then we see in a separate silo, oh wow, some people have access to really good health care. Some people can't afford any health care. That's that's an unequal silo there. Then you look at the next thing, it all can look like separate issues. But when we've actually done our participatory research and kind of learned more about these things, what we find is we find 2 big intertwined roots that underlie all of these separate seeming issues. And they shape each of these crises. And I think these will be familiar to you through your own experience in the world and through what we've already been talking about here. So one of them is just the unbridled drive for profit that is the algorithm for all decision-making in this society. Look at healthcare. It isn't about actually healthy communities and people having access to care and to health. It's about how to make money, how to extract money off of people from needing healthcare and wanting healthy lives. Unbridled profit drive above care for people or care for the planet. So if you think about profit, people, planet, the priority issue in this society as it is currently organized is profit at any expense to people and the planet, which is why we have throwaway people and throwaway places. And the second intertwined root that we see is white supremacy. And we've recently seen the use of racialized violence to protect white supremacy and white property in this time of uprising. So when you put this profit drive and this white supremacy sort of this structure together and look at the underlying roots of all these seemingly separate things, lo and behold, it's the same roots. And so when Power does our work, we're trying to actually address the roots. We're not just trying to win something to tweak it. Although sometimes you do need to do kind of reformy things just to protect people and help people in the short term survive. But we're really talking about addressing those deeper roots. In building a movement for transformation across this state, we have a relentless teaching about dismantling white supremacy. We do that for a number of reasons. One is we can't build a winning coalition if we don't address racism front and center, because urban, suburban, and rural people think we don't have things in common and can be easily divided by politicians and by corporations who don't want us to stand together across these lines of difference. But we can't work together unless we do constant education about racism, because too much white supremacy pollutes the relationships and the movement. So in order to work together, we have just got to dismantle that amongst us, between us, informing us. We've got to have a constant teaching about racism and what it means to work together, really to work together. And when we talk about addressing the roots of economic injustice, we're really talking about economic democracy. We're talking about a whole different kind of economy that puts people and planet as the priorities when making decisions about what to build, where to invest, what kind of energy to use, those kind of things. So we're talking about a different kind of economy. We're talking about a real transformation of the economy, and we do it campaign at a time, project at a time. So let me stop again here and see if people have comments, input, questions.
I think this is another element to maybe add to in the original phrase, the economic piece of how much hitting, like, you either have jobs and have what you need to take care of yourself as human beings and communities, or you have the environment, and you can't have both at once. And this is like a helpful understanding of the flipping of economy to be of the earth and saving everything and everyone.
Yes, exactly. That we are all interconnected. With the earth literally sustains us. I mean, we are made of the minerals of the earth. We eat the produce of the earth. I mean, we literally are of the earth. We can't live with the earth as other. And, you know, we're going to somehow be this corporate human community. That is an impossible concept. We have to be interdependent with the earth. So if we don't sustain a livable earth, we aren't going to have livable, healthy human communities. And at a certain point, if we can't move forward on all the issues together, we aren't going to have racial or economic justice or a planet that can sustain us. So when we first started this work, we would hear things from our Black and brown friends in the communities we work with, like, oh, we don't know if this is our issue. I don't see any polar bears around here. We literally heard that phrase. And that's what people say. And at this point, those same people are saying, we are outraged that anyone would say this isn't our issue. And I think that's the result of just education and organizing and aligning with people around all the issues we need to care about, such as ending mass incarceration, building public schools that work. You know, if we can't do this all together, we're not going to do any of it together, because all of the issues are so intertwined and interconnected and the result of the exact same root forces. So we can't leave this piece intact and expect that the rest of it is going to be addressed. It has to be really a multi-issue justice movement across these silos for any of us to win, really. It's really about that kind of human solidarity and making sure it works for everyone else as well as for you, because then it will also work for you. So it's kind of like our self-interest is in solidarity. Like, organizing is lots of times the model that we inherited from Saul Alinsky over the decades is about self-interest. And a big piece of the work right now is finding self-interest in solidarity, like understanding that my self-interest is in dismantling white supremacy. My self-interest is in building an economy where anybody can have a green job. So, and again, there's no individual solutions. I can't just go off and plan my little happy life and expect that my kids are going to be able to breathe or drink clean water, or, you know what I mean? Like, we all have to kind of step in and make this work for everybody. So self-interest and solidarity, I think, is an interesting concept. And in the work of dismantling white supremacy, in particular, what white people are being called to do is to find your own interest in dismantling white supremacy. You've been hurt by this too. Go there. Learn what you've lost by being so-called categorized as white. Last night I was in a national training by Faith in Action. I don't know if anyone else here stepped into that, but Michael Ray Matthews, who is the Black clergy leader, is the deputy director of Faith in Action and a really powerful, brilliant clergy leader, showed a clip of a comedian, a Black comedian whose name I am forgetting at the moment, very well known somebody, who was saying to this white audience, you guys just think you're white. You think you're white, but don't take seriously anything here I say about white people because you're not really white. And that white people have also been put into the box of what it means to be white and separate and to not share the same human interests that everybody else on the planet, you know, that actually the global majority, which is Black and brown, shares. So that's new for white people, to interrogate whiteness. And that's what we're being called to do. So all through power, there are racial sort of consciousness caucuses, and people are really looking at what does it mean to do sort of human collective liberation work around this social construct of race that actually hurts lots and lots of people, and particularly hurts Black and brown people. So all of that, Power's focus is on both local places within southeastern Pennsylvania. We're deep in Philadelphia. We're all through the metro area, the suburbs, and we are out in the central counties, such as Lancaster, Dauphin, Harrisburg. We're all around there, and we're in the Lehigh Valley. So and collectively in our coalitions, we cover 95% of the geography and the population of the entire state. So that's our kind of organizing focus. I said we're part of two national networks. One is Faith in Action. One is the Partnership for Working Families. In each of those, our climate work works in cohort with 5 other states that are organized by the national networks. And our climate work is also in some way shepherded by something called the Clean Energy and Equity Fund that has funded a state table of our closest allies, including us, that we've co-created over the last 2.5 years. I'm going to end today by saying climate justice and jobs ends up having a very lot of technical expertise involved, sort of like, you know, lots of arcane detail around solar energy, renewable energy, policy, just, you know, really a lot of technical stuff. But what Power is lifting up is the big moral message that we need to create a world that works for everyone. And here's how we're going to get there. We're going to address race and class front and center. We're going to lift up the moral message from our faith traditions of the common good, that we all need education. We all need livelihood. We all need clean air and water. We all need homes. We all need healthcare. So we're going to lift up the big moral message of a world that works for everyone. And we're going to build people power in the streets and in the voting booth to get there. Underlying all of Power's strategy teams is a terrific voter engagement campaign. We have just absolute voter engagement commitment and very, very strong presence, led by a state director, at this time, Kendra Cochran, who has what we call community advocacy teams of people who were going door to door, but it's now all by phone and text, very relationally, many contacts with the same people, mostly with low likely voters, people not that likely to register, people not that likely to vote, in relationship. And those teams of people are hired from the communities they are organizing. They're just magnificent. And that work is really strong, and our statistics are really strong on the voter engagement. So big moral messaging about the common good, talking about race and class in the same sentence to the same people, or the same conversation to the same people, building people power in the streets and in the voting booth. And that's that's all you need to know, really. There also is lots of technical policy stuff. We have people who are wonky and feed us the information. Some of us are interested in that, some are not. We work with the mantra that everybody brings their expertise to the table. Some people are experts on surviving racism. Some people are experts on surviving poverty. Some people are experts on, what kind of gauge the pipeline should be. Some people are experts on how you actually build a winning voting coalition to influence a certain legislator. We all bring different expertise, and we crisscrossing all those lanes I just laid out. And we welcome everybody's expertise. We're all learners, we're all teachers, and we're building it together. No one yet knows how to do it. We're figuring it out. You are the it. So welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for being here for this. Thank you to the people who listened to this recording after the fact. And I hope that this will create a ripple effect as you bring other people into this work. Thank you all. We're going to end with the same song we began with, which has become something of a movement song. It's easy to learn. It's usually done in sessions of 3 times each. So you'll have 3 chances right here to join in if you'd like to.
Known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle around to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle around to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love.